Hello everybody, my name is Ruben Major. I am an instructor and program director for EMS University as well as the Chief Executive Officer. I'm going to be giving you information today on anatomy and physiology for the EMT. Now, with this particular topic, what we're going to do is we're going to briefly discuss the issues. We're not going to get too involved or in depth with any of the topics, and the reason being is that there's so much supplementary material that's out there that would be more helpful to you as an EMT learning the subject than what we can give you right now. Additionally, when you're going through and doing the recertification process, there's just such a wide variety of issues that people might have in particular with understanding the particular topics. So, you might be really strong on one section and you may be very weak on the others. Recommendation is to obviously study more of those areas where you're weak rather than the ones that you're strong or good at understanding. So to kind of give you a general idea of what we're going to be going through, we'll just briefly discuss information at the cellular level. Then we'll discuss anatomical planes and some medical terminology, and then we're going to go through the body systems and some functions. And again, I'll try to make this as brief as possible, as I do know that going through anatomy can be somewhat of a dry subject at times. For me, it's the physiology part that really interests me. However, they're both very important in order to teach the subject properly. So, cellular physiology. Cells, basically, these are the smallest building blocks of life out there. They're composed, or all fundamental units of living things have cells, and every living thing has cells. And there's a question in here, or there's a statement in here about sodium potassium pumps, and why are we talking about them? This is important for us to know because as an EMT, you are going to be dealing with the chemical processes of transporting patients that have intravenous lines, or they have medications, and there's chemical processes that are going on inside the body that are important to know. The sodium potassium pump is basically a pump that permits and allows things to go into and out of the cell. Whenever things are not properly going into the cell or out of the cell, there can be a problem. And again, the idea here is that we want to make sure, the body wants to make sure that it has homeostasis, and that things are, chemicals or chemical processes are occurring the way that they should be. So there's a little bit of a disconnect here on this particular slide. It's not exactly the greatest slide to throw out there, but the idea is that the sodium potassium pump, again, being responsible for all this stuff, if there's any failure at all, it can result in the rupture of the cells and swelling. And this isn't good, because when your cells are all dying on a massive level, your body's not able to function properly. Again, the sodium potassium pump is a cellular mechanism. It moves sodium out of the cell and potassium into the cell. So these pumps are so important for understanding the basic function of cellular physiology. As an EMT, you might think, well, gee whiz, why do I need to know any of this stuff? And it is somewhat important for you to know and understand. Practically, the reason why it has value is in intravenous fluids that are given to the patient. Right now, if you're given a 0.9% solution to the patient, or if you're monitoring an IV, which is an EMT skill in many states, you want to make sure that you are giving them, or that the fluids that you're giving them are the appropriate fluids, or the fluids that are being given to them, rather, are the appropriate fluids. And so whenever you have a concentration of salt that's too high, then it can create issues for the cells, because it sends the salt into the bloodstream, and then the uh, the the cells try to just they get all the water comes out of the cells, and then it causes the cells to shrivel up. Or if you introduce a solution into the body which doesn't have enough salt in it, then you can have a situation where the sodium potassium pump fails and it results in rupture of the cells and swelling, or rupture of the cells at its most extreme. So again, this is not a good thing in a practical sense. I understand there's a lot of theory here involved, but just kind of an important point for you to know and understand, especially if you're doing IV monitoring. So let's move on to some more simplistic topics. Let's look at anatomical positions. Now we have your regular standard anatomical position with the patient standing there and their hands out. That's what we're referring to when we look at the normal standard anatomical position. And usually this is kind of a more of a reference point for us. So we have supine. Supine means that they're laying on their back. Fowler's position, they're sitting up, and prone, where they're laying down on their face. Lateral recumbent can either be on the right or left side, and this is basically they're laying on their sides. And then Trendelenburg or shock position. For the Trendelenburg position, obviously you're going to be elevating the feet slightly. And now we have anatomical planes. So in anatomical planes, you have different methods of describing where the patient is at. And the idea behind these complicated terms is so that we can describe as providers to each other very precise terminology or very precise mechanisms of injury, and we're all on the same page. Granted, we can use plain English as well to do this, but it's nice to have words like this because it's more precise when we're describing a certain issue. And when time is of the essence, it's important to be as efficient as possible with our language usage. And again, we have anatomical reference points here. Superior is up from a particular point. Inferior, below a particular point. So you might say inferior to the hips, or to the pelvis rather, or anterior. So anterior would be to the front of, posterior is to the back, and then we have midline and mid-axillary, and you can see that here on the picture. And medial and lateral, proximal, distal. Remember, with all of these points that we're discussing right here, they're points of reference that you have to have in order to state these terminologies. So you're going to say, that the hand is distal to the elbow, or you'll say the fingers are proximal to the. Actually, it probably wouldn't be good to say that the fingers were proximal to anything, because the fingers are at the very end. So we would say fingers are distal to the hand, and the hand is distal to the fingers. Or phalanges if you're using proper medical terminology. Anatomical terminology, we have right and left, your patient's right and your patient's left. Not your left, not your right, but your patient's right and left. And this could be quite confusing for us when we're first starting out, trying to figure out, are we talking about their right or our right? It's always the patient's right or always the patient's left. Bilateral, unilateral, those are on both sides or on one side. So bilateral is both, unilateral is one. Dorsal or ventral, back or front. So dorsal is another way of saying back, and ventral is another way of saying front. Flexion, extension, pretty obvious what that is. And then pronate, supinate, we just talked about those words. And plantar and palmar, obviously plantar is on the bottom of your foot and palmar is on your palms. Now we have body systems. The first system that we're going to go over is the musculoskeletal system, involving the muscles and the skeleton. So what does the musculoskeletal system do? Well, its function is to give the body its shape, protect the vital organs, and provide body movements. It mainly does serve as a protective mechanism for us, and it does protect our vital functions from being injured, as it is almost a shield for our vital organs. And then the components are bones, joints, connective tissues, and muscles. And here we have all the bones. I'll just kind of give you a second to take a look at this slide. And I think one of the things that's important while you're looking at this slide is to understand that when we discuss the head, because we have lots of head injuries that happen, right, as providers, you'll go to, you have to tell them, exactly where is it hurting on the head, what kind of head injury is it, and so you'll want to tell them, well, it's a frontal head injury, or it's on the right parietal area or temporal area, occipital region, right? And so when you're describing exactly where it is, you're going to want to use these reference points as well. The face, usually it's seem to work out a little bit better to be just using the standard terminology, or the common terminology rather. All right, so the next section that we're discussing is going to be the bones, and we'll start with the spinal column. So we have 5 different pieces to the spinal column. We have the cervical spinal column, we have the thoracic, lumbar, sacrum or sacral, and coccyx or coxal. And the cervical is perhaps the most important part of the spinal column. It has 7 vertebrae. The thoracic has 12, and then you'll see 5 here for lumbar, 5 for sacral, and 4 for the coccyx. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about the spinal column in the nervous system portion of this class, but the idea here is that you understand and realize that you have the spinal cord, which is inside of the spinal column. So if you become injured or if something occurs to your spine, it can affect your nervous system through your spinal cord, and that's where the issues come into play. So if you have a cervical injury, you may possibly have an effect. It may possibly have an effect on your spinal cord, which would then translate into some other issue that you might have with a function of your body. If you've ever heard the term C3, 4, and 5, keep the diaphragm alive, something very important to know. So if you injure this particular area of your cervical spine, you can possibly have an issue with being able to breathe properly. So just some things to keep in mind. We also have the thorax, which are the ribs and the sternum. And again, just take your time taking a look at these figures. In particular, one of the things that's important to keep in mind here for injury purposes are how many ribs that we have and how many areas you can see there that are structurally that could be structurally compromised. Again, we have so many ribs so that we're able to protect ourselves and our internal organs better. But if you do have an issue with a broken rib, it is possible that one of those can crack and then puncture one of your organs. So these can create obvious issues for us as well. There's also a possibility that some of these injuries can go right through the ribs, as there is an area where there's space and there's no bones to protect. And then note where your xiphoid process is. And now we have the pelvis. The pelvis is composed of the iliac crest, which is here at the top. The ilium is the kind of ear-shaped portion of the pelvis. And then you have the pubis, which is the anterior portion of the pelvis, and the ischium, which is this kind of inferior portion of the pelvis. And then don't forget the pubis, which is towards the middle of the pelvis. And we also have the lower extremities, so take a look here. This is also an important component of your anatomy. It's important here to note where we have at the top in this particular area a portion of the pelvis, and you see there's a connection right here where the head is. It goes into the socket. So this is your leg. This particular upper portion, you will have the femur. Femur fractures are not uncommon. When they occur, they usually occur about right here. Also, pelvic fractures can occur anywhere within the pelvis. Always be wary because there's lots of bleeding out that can occur in the pelvis. And then you have lots of parts in here in your knee which can become an issue over time. Lots of people who have knee problems. And then your tibula and your fibula. And remember that your tibula is the bigger, apologize for that. Remember that your tibula is the bigger of the two. So tibula bigger, fibula is a little bit smaller. And if we take a look at the upper extremities, we'll see that we have the clavicle, which is your collarbone. And then you have your scapula, which is the shoulder bone right here. And then the acromion, which is the tip of the shoulder, the very, very tip. The humerus, the biggest bone in your arm. And then you have the radius and ulna. Now remember, the radius is the bone that goes from your thumb up to your elbow, and the ulna is on the opposite side. So that's one good way of kind of understanding the difference between the two. And so you can say, you know, this was a radial, an injury to the radial area or to the ulnar area. And then you have your carpals and you have your metacarpals. And your phalanges, which are your fingers. Joints. Okay, so some people have issues with understanding the differences between joints and tendons. And just remember that joints are where bones connect to other bones. So we have the ball and socket, hinged, fixed, gliding, and condylid. So, the ball and socket, obviously a good one for demonstrating that is going to be your shoulder at the very top where it rotates. That would be a ball and socket. Hinge is kind of just like a door hinge is what it says. So where we go in and out, where we can flex and extend, flex and extend. So like in an area like the elbow, that would be a good example of that. And fixed, a fixed joint is basically a joint that isn't really going anywhere. You'll find a lot of these in your hand. And then gliding, one say that goes back and forth across each other. And then condylid. Some of these are found in your knees. There's just lots of different moving parts that need the joints that might not necessarily be something that you would purposefully control, but something that would be good for you to be able to have, because you have lots of moving parts. So it would just improve the function by having it. You also have ligaments and tendons. Now, ligaments hold joints together. But what kind of joints do they hold together? Well, they actually, what they do is they hold together or connect bone to bone. So ligaments connect bone to bone. I'll even write this in here for you. Bone to bone. And tendons attach muscle to bone. So the way that I used to remember this was, I would say for ligaments, like to like. And I don't know why that stuck with me, but ligaments and like seemed to help me to remember that these were bone to bone. And so for tendons, you're attaching muscle to bone. You can also use another tip here. It says, remember that muscles are tender. So attach muscles to bone, tendons do, and ligaments attach bone to bone. Okay. So moving on, we have different types of muscle. We have voluntary muscle. Now this voluntary muscle is the skeletal muscle. It's the muscle that we voluntarily move. It may attach muscles to bones. It forms muscle parts, the major muscle mass in the body. And again, it can be controlled by the nervous system and the brain. We can contract and relax it when we want to. It's responsible for our main movement. And we have involuntary muscle. So involuntary muscle are muscles that will automatically work on their own no matter what. Now, some of these muscles are quasi-voluntary and quasi-involuntary, such as the act of breathing. While it's not necessarily a voluntary process all the time, it can be an involuntary process as well, meaning that we can control it at will when we want to, but if we choose not to, at times it will control on its own. As far as the excuse me, sorry about that. As far as the involuntary muscle, they do carry out automatic muscular functions of the body. Patients have no direct control over these muscles. They respond to stimuli such as stretching, heating, and cold. We have cardiac muscle. That's found in the heart. It is involuntary, but it's a special type of muscle. It has its own supply of blood through the coronary artery system, and it has automaticity, meaning that it has the ability to contract on its own, and it provides its own electricity. Okay, moving along. So we have the respiratory system. I'll just kind of give you another second to take a look at this video, or this slide rather. Okay. And we have the, as far as the function's concerned, we have the pharynx, the epiglottis, the trachea, the larynx, and lungs. Okay, so the pharynx is composed of the oral pharynx and nasopharynx. So the nasopharynx is in the nasal area, and the oral pharynx is this region right here. So these areas are the pharynx. Then we have the larynx. The larynx is typically called the voice box. And just below this we have the trachea. Also, it is important for us to remember that the epiglottis is the area that closes off and separates the esophagus from the trachea. So this particular area is very important for you, especially if you're a paramedic or if you're authorized to do intubations, because this could be a problem for you if you're not able to get it out of the way or find this particular anatomical feature. And then you have the lungs, the carina, which is the midpoint right here of the lungs, and then that branches off to your different bronchi. And you also notice that I don't know if you can't really see it on this picture, but the right lung is a lot bigger than the left lung. And mainly this appears to be a functional, there appears to be a functional reason for this, or a structural reason for this, as the heart is located on the left side. So that would probably be one of the biggest reasons why that's the case. And then you have your bronchioles, which are kind of smaller bronchi, and alveoli. Okay, now just kind of going a little bit more in depth, we have the diaphragm, which is the dome-shaped muscle. We talked a little bit about this in an earlier section. This is the muscle that controls your respiratory functions. During inhalation, this is called the active phase. It flattens the intercostal muscles, contract, and it increases the size of the thoracic cavity. So this is when obviously air goes into the lungs. And then the passive process is during exhalation, where the diaphragm and muscles relax and air comes out or goes out. You have your respiratory physiology, where the oxygen and all of the other nutrients and materials coming from respiration, or gases rather, coming from respiration, make their way into the bloodstream. We like to just say oxygen. So when oxygen goes into this particular area, it mixes with the capillaries, and then these capillaries take this oxygen oxygen into the bloodstream. It says oxygen per blood in the capillaries also passes into the alveoli. So if you think about it in a circular function, the way that it's going to work is you're going to breathe in, the breath is going to go into your lungs, it's going to go out into your alveoli, and then from your alveoli is going to meet up in the capillary area, where this oxygen is going to be distributed to your body. Now, once it's distributed to your body is going to use it up. So much like you would if you were eating something and then you have waste products and they're eliminated later, it's the same thing that happens in your bloodstream. So you're going to use these waste products, and then they're going to be put back in, or they're going to be put back into the lungs through the bronchioles. So it actually, or excuse me, through the alveoli. So basically goes back to the capillaries and then back to the alveoli and then through the bronchioles and then out the bronchus, and then obviously the bronchus, your lungs. So out your lungs and then out back into the air as carbon dioxide. Now, how does it make its way out as carbon dioxide? Well, basically the blood system, your cells, convert it into carbon dioxide. And there's a very complicated process that we don't need to go into that explains that. But that's just the general gist of how it all works. So as you can see, the respiratory system links up to the cardiovascular system. There's a lot of overlap. Very important for you to know that there's overlap. Everything works together. So the circulatory system is composed of the heart. It's composed of the arteries and veins and the blood. So as far as the heart's concerned, structure and function wise, you have the atria and you have the ventricles. So, and then you also have valves which prevent the backflow of blood. Let's go into the atria very quickly. So, I'm just going to kind of go back to this picture so you can take a look. At the very, very front right here, we have the right atrium, and then we have the left atrium. Now we can't see it because we don't see the internal part. Then we have the right ventricle, which is in this little area right here, and then the left ventricle on this side. Now what's going to happen with blood flow is the blood is going to come in from, you guessed it, the superior and inferior vena cava. Now when this blood comes in, this is the vena cava right here. So vena cava. And it's going to come in through here, and then it's going to be used in the right atrium. Now you have this blood that is in the right atrium. Now this blood's basically going to go from the right atrium right here to the right ventricle, and there's a valve right here. Again, this is a very brief description, so I'm not going to go into all the finite details. But anyways, there's a valve in here to prevent it from being flowed, or to prevent it from being flowed back into the atrium. Anyways, so it goes from the right atrium to the right ventricle. And then from the right ventricle, what it does is it goes out the pulmonic arteries, and then it goes back in. After the pulmonic means the lungs. So say you've got a lungs out here, and you have lung out here, and anyway, so it's going to go into the lungs, go through all that passive diffusion process that we talked about, where the blood basically becomes oxygen rich. Because again, this is going to the lungs, right? So just like we just talked about a second ago. So blood becomes oxygen rich, and then comes right back in through the veins, the pulmonic veins. And then once it comes in through the pulmonic veins, it enters in right here in the left atrium. And then from the left atrium, it goes down to the left ventricle. And the left ventricle is the biggest part of the heart. And right there, it goes right from here all the way out to the body through the aorta. And also, don't forget, there's a little bit of a passive process going on right here too. The coronary arteries are fed through the aorta. So you have blood that's being ejected, and then upon return of that blood, you'll have a little bit of blood that goes through these veins right here to keep the heart going. Now, again, when I say return of blood through here, I don't mean that the blood actually goes down the aorta and then comes all the way back up. But when it does get ejected down the aorta, there is a little teeny tiny bit of backflow that will occur through tiny blood vessels right here that go through the coronary arteries. And so the coronary arteries, again, keep the heart working. This muscle, in order to stay alive, this heart muscle, has to have oxygenated blood. If it doesn't, then part of the heart muscle starts to die, and then you end up having issues with irregular heartbeats and these are the sorts of things that can cause heart attacks. So it's best to think of this entire process as two different systems. So or two different ejection systems. You have an ejection that occurs right here in the right ventricle, and you have another ejection that occurs here in the left ventricle. When the right ventricle ejects blood, it ejects blood out the heart into the pulmonary arteries. So and these are the pulmonary arteries right here. So it's very important to think of arteries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. So all arteries carry blood away from the heart, and then veins carry blood to the heart. So again, you have an ejection right here, which occurs. It goes out the pulmonary vein, and then when it comes back, it goes out the pulmonary artery, and then when it comes back, it goes through the pulmonary vein. You have your second ejection process right here. This is where you have blood in the left ventricle. This blood is ejected out from the left ventricle into the aorta, which is the largest artery in the entire body. So this is it's kind of a difficult concept to grasp, because traditionally what we think of when we think of veins and arteries, we think of veins as having not very much oxygen, and we think of arteries as having a lot of oxygen. That's always true. That generally always true, with the exception of the heart. In the heart, it's the opposite. So in the heart, your arteries have inside the heart, or actually inside where the heart blood flow is through the pulmonary veins and arteries, that are the only places where it's actually switched. So just remember that those are some subtle differences as far as how this process works. You have two ejection phases. You have one where it ejects out the pulmonary arteries and comes back in to the left atrium from the pulmonary vein. And then you have a second ejection process whereby it goes from the left ventricle and out the aorta. Okay, and I hope I made that I hope that I made that a little bit easier to understand for you. So now that we're done with that particular section, we're going to talk about arteries again. Arteries, remember, they carry blood away from the heart to the rest of the body. It doesn't have anything to do with oxygen. It doesn't have anything to do with carbon dioxide. It's just about carrying blood away from the heart to the rest of the body, or away from the heart in general. It's not just the rest of the body, but for the most part, it's the rest of the body. But it is just away from the heart. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. And they branch into arterioles, and then they branch into capillaries. And on your right-hand side, you're going to see a variety of different arteries that are important for you to know. Capillaries. Capillaries are tiny blood vessels that connect the arterioles to venules. So remember, before we were talking about how you had diffusion process of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the lungs. Well, along with that process, you also have something occurring where arteries and venules are going to connect, and they connect in the capillaries. The capillary walls are very, very small. They may only be 1 cell thick, very, very, very tiny, tiny. And they're found in all parts of the body. So you'll be able to see, you would be able to see, if you were able to look small enough, in a small enough area, capillaries just about anywhere. They're everywhere in the body, basically, where there's blood. So these capillaries will allow for the exchange of oxygen, nutrients, and the waste products. So again, when we were talking about how we had that cycle, the oxygen and all the nutrients get used up from the arteries, and then they go into the veins through the venules, and even through that before through the capillaries. Capillaries is kind of a marketplace of where all that occurs. Veins, in contrast to arteries, carry blood back to the heart. And you have two major veins here. You have the pulmonary vein and the vena cava. So when I talk to you about the vena cava as well, veins do branch off into smaller venules. Again, they are going to passively diffuse into the capillary exchange system, where they're going to usually pick up waste products. It doesn't necessarily always happen. Remember, in the lungs, it's a different process. So the lung veins, the pulmonary veins, are actually picking up oxygen and taking it to the heart. So let's talk a little bit about blood. Blood contains 4 different components, and you'll see it right here. There are red blood cells, there's white blood cells, plasma, and platelets. And if you take a look at the figure right here, you'll see a little bit more information about the different components of blood. You can look at that and kind of get more information about what exactly is going on there. But they usually put it in a spinner, and then when it's in that spinner, what it does is, sorry about that, when you put it in a spinner, it will actually separate, and most of it's going to end up being plasma, which is the fluid that carries all of the blood cells and nutrients. And then, but as far as the blood cells, the red blood cells are what make things happen in the body. They carry the oxygen to the organs and to the muscles, and make things work the way that they need to in order for the body to do what it's supposed to. They also carry carbon dioxide away from organs, and they also do a lot of other things that are important for the body. But those are the main functions, main purposes of red blood cells. White blood cells are for your immune system response, and there's a lot of different components to the white blood cells. We could go into that, but it's not necessary. Then you have plasma. Again, I told you what that was, and then platelets. Platelets are for, say, blood clotting. So let's say that you have a situation where you've got a person who is bleeding all over the place, or they have a small cut, doesn't matter. Whatever it is, if you have any external bleeding, the platelets are going to come out, and they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that the bleeding stops. So that's the primary reason that we have platelets. Platelets are located just about anywhere. So now let's talk about blood pressure. We have systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure. Now you can see systolic blood pressure is when it's working, diastolic when it's resting. So systolic blood pressure, in other words, is when you have pressure, the most pressure occurring within the blood system, within the arteries. You're going to have systolic. Then you have diastolic, which is the resting pressure which is exerted against the walls of the artery. So one of the things that we end up having a problem with for people who have high blood pressure is when their blood pressure, their diastolic resting blood pressure, reaches over 90 millimeters of mercury. And the reason why this is a bad thing is because even though their heart will go above, or everybody's heart goes above 90, usually most adults will go above 90 for their systolic on a regular basis. When it's resting and it's above 90, that's a bad thing because it's always exerting a lot of pressure against the veins, and so these can cause other problems such as weakening of the blood vessels, and this is also indicative of an accumulation of plaque and garbage in a person's blood vessels. So you have perfusion. Defined perfusion is the circulation of blood through an organ's tissues. Perfusion is the delivery of oxygen and other nutrients of the cells to all organ systems, and the removal of waste products and you'll see hypoperfusion all over the place. As an EMT, you encounter it all the time. In your books, it says hyperperfusion. It's shock, basically, is the other word for it. Now let's talk about your nervous system a little bit. Pretty simple diagram here. Your nervous system is composed of two primary parts. It's composed of your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system includes the brain and the spinal cord, spinal column right there. So you have the brain and the spinal cord. And then your peripheral nervous system, which is composed of all of your peripheral nerves, so the ones that branch out basically into other parts of your body. And then you also have an autonomic nervous system, which we'll discuss here shortly. The nervous system basically does control voluntary and involuntary activity in your body, and again, we talked about your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system already. As for the autonomic nervous system, this particular nervous system is important for us to know about because it is what controls the feelings of fight or flight or the parasympathetic system. So sympathetic nervous system occurs in the basic effects of it are an elevated heart rate, elevated blood pressure, and those sorts of things. And the exact opposite is what you'll find occurs in the parasympathetic nervous system, or the parasympathetic reaction, rather. Endocrine system, kind of very brief for us. These are usually glandular systems. We have them acting on the body for a variety of different functions. These are kind of more long-term rather than acute issues when people have problems with their glands. However, they can be acute, but just kind of something to think about when you're out there and you encounter these issues that these are more chronic in nature than anything else. So it's highly unlikely that you're gonna be needing to know much of this information just for purposes of the street value. As far as the book knowledge is concerned, obviously, they do want to give you a little bit of an overview of it, but here's a good quick diagram in case you're curious as to what they are. And again, the endocrine system are responsible for hormones and regulating body activities, and it says such as reproduction, changes, and metabolism. It's kind of a catch-all system. It says all ductless glands are part of an endocrine system, and it includes the hypothalamus, brain, pituitary gland, thyroid, parathyroid gland, so all these different parts of the endocrine system. And then you also have your digestive system. Digestive system is very important for the EMT to know. You're going to get lots of calls for people that are having digestive issues or having abdominal pain or those sorts of things. Up here, this diagram's a little bit jagged, but you have your esophagus and where the food comes in and hopefully it doesn't come out. Then you also have your liver and your gallbladder, your stomach, the colon, and then your pancreas and duodenum. Ascending colon, cecum, ileum, jejunum, all different parts of your digestive system. The sigmoid colon, rectum, and anus. GI system components, again, mouth, stomach, gallbladder, liver. Hepatomegaly means enlarged liver. Important to know because you will be encountering this on a regular basis if you haven't already. Intestines, bladder, and kidneys. Genitourinary system. So just what it says, it covers the genitals and the urinary system. They are located close together in the abdomen and pelvis, and they have shared functions. And I always get this word wrong, but I'm going to try to say it again. It's the Integumentary System, and basically this is the skin system. It protects your body from the environment, bacteria. It's, just it's an important shelter. It is actually the largest organ of the body, believe it or not. Skin weighs a lot, and it helps you to, again, be protected from the external environment. Different layers of the skin. We're going to go over this again when we talk about burn injuries and in the trauma section, if you're continuing on to that. Otherwise, I'll just kind of give you a brief overview of the layers of your skin. You have the epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. Some people call the hypodermis area the subcutaneous area. So I'll just kind of go over what the epidermis is. The epidermis is the external layer of skin. It's what we see, feel, and touch. This dermis area is the area which just beneath it that contains most of what all the functioning processes of the skin. So you have sweat glands, you have various different arterioles and venules in there, and small nervous system tissue. And this is where all the swelling and healing and all those sorts of things would occur. And then you have the hypodermis or subcutaneous layer, which is a layer of fat that provides further insulation and protection in the event that you get injured or you have other additional issues. All the three of these systems, just very briefly so you know, the epidermis is usually found when you have a first degree burn. It's going to be in your epidermis, the dermis, second degree burn, and if it reaches the subcutaneous layer, usually it's a third degree burn. We'll go over that a little bit more, again, like I said, in that burn section, if you're sticking around to that. Otherwise, you could just freely research. And that's pretty much going to do it. Obviously, if you do have any questions, we're not taking questions here, but you can always email us, and we'll be more than happy to answer any content questions that you have. And that's going to do it for this particular section.